Welcome, everyone. My name is Lou Nani, and we're thrilled to have you join us today from the Rex and Alice Martin Media Center here on the campus of Notre Dame. Let's just begin by letting you all know that we're keeping you and your families very much in our hearts and prayers as we continue to navigate our ways through this pandemic and its economic fallout. It's a great honor today to be joined by a good friend and colleague, Jack Swarbrick, who is a vice president and the James E. Rohr Director of Athletics here at the University of Notre Dame. Before saying a few words about Jack, let me just list over the last 12 years a few of his seminal accomplishments. We have to look at the outstanding coaching hires that he's made during his tenure. We look at how he renegotiated the BCS positioning of Notre Dame and was able to maintain our football independence during his tenure, how he helped us to join the ACC with most of our other sports, and then more recently brought our hockey program into the Big Ten. We look at the move to Under Armour. We look at the new facilities during Jack's tenure that have been added. State-of-the-art practice facilities for our basketball programs, also for football and our soccer programs, a new track and field facilities, and many know that Jack was the visionary behind our Campus Crossroads projects, adding 3 state-of-the-art buildings to the Notre Dame Stadium, which really have integrated in ways that no other school has ever done, athletics, student life, and academics. And I would also say really is pioneering move ahead of all other schools to develop Fighting Irish Media, which is a way for Notre Dame to produce its own content rather than passively waiting for just others. And on that note, before Jack begins to respond to some questions and share his thoughts with us today, let's take a look at a brief video that was recently released by our Fighting Irish Media team about that fighting Irish spirit of our Notre Dame student athletes, especially during these difficult times.
Today's challenges may be new.
Tournament canceled.
Avoiding large crowds, social distancing.
It's unprecedented.
Suspended all in-person instruction on campus.
But being challenged is nothing new for us. You see, every day we make choices. We choose faith over fear. We choose hard work without shortcuts. We choose to give up what we love to protect those we love, because that's who we are.
Having these huge scars was really hard for me. There's more to me than playing soccer.
Torn Achilles, my shoulder,
it's a rotator cuff injury,
torn my ACL.
Missing another full season.
Be disappointed in me.
What else can make me who I am?
If you're still here after 3 injuries, you're here for a reason.
Blue butterflies, that was her sign. If I didn't tear my ACL, I wouldn't have been able to spend as much time during the final year that my mother was alive.
And she told me that my mom had passed away. I wasn't going to come here, and then my mom told me to come here. I have a mother here, but I'll look at her and know that I'm here for a reason.
How do you come back from so many knockdown punches?
4 players are out with ACL injury.
Largest lead is 15 for the Dogs.
Irish still haven't
Only
scored.
7 scholarship players.
For the win! Good! Enrique Ogunbowale wins the national championship!
Go to Notre Dame, this is what we do.
Can they do it again?
They score! The Cardiac Kids have done it again!
Tie game, bases loaded, 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th.
The Fighting Irish walk off with the win of the night.
To the end zone! Touchdown! Eden Boone!
Molly Seidel, she will win.
Walk into the team, you just get inspired by an extraordinary athlete.
I don't think that anybody catches him. Here comes Nagoose. I'm wrong. Notre Dame wins it.
DMR has been more important to me than any individual race ever has been.
And I refuse to leave this locker room without a win. You know why? Because I'm too prideful for each and every one of y'all.
Playoff bid for Fighting Irish in 5.
Lashewski for 3.
Sit down for my team, my brothers.
We become stronger and more united when we fight through adversity. It's what we do. That's why they call us the Fighting Irish.
So, How will you choose to keep fighting?
Wow, what another powerful video from our Fighting Irish media. Jack, before we begin with any of our formal questions here, I just want to share a compliment with you that probably has never been shared before, and that is I've taken some fashion tips from you. I want you to know that until I was in so many meetings with you, and I noticed the colorful socks that you wear, and I want you to know that a couple years ago I went to some, not just my plain black socks. I branched out. Now you're staging me here with your shamrocks and my dots, but nevertheless, I may be the first who's ever followed you fashion-wise.
Kimberly is mortified at the notion that anyone would follow me from a fashion perspective, but thanks. If I had a little influence, that's good.
Well, let's begin with an unscripted question. Just a few minutes ago, it was announced that legendary Notre Dame women's basketball coach, Muffet McGraw, has decided to retire. I'm sure it's something you've been working with her on for the last, weeks and months. And she's going to be replaced by a former player and assistant coach, Niele Ivey, who everyone is very excited about. But you're losing a legendary coach, somebody who's won 2 national championships, been to the Final Four 9 times, has won more games than any other coach in the history of any Notre Dame sport. So talk to us a little bit about what Muffet has meant to not only Notre Dame athletics, but to the university and the landscape of athletics more broadly, and then a little bit about the succession plan.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. It's just hard to imagine this place without Muffet on the sidelines of the basketball game. I know it's going to take me the full year to get used to it. It has been such an absolute privilege to work with her. I've learned so much from her. But while she is one of the best coaches I've ever been around, more than that, she is maybe the best educator I've ever been around. Mm-hmm. The influence she has had on the young women she has coached, the young women who have been student managers for her, the young women who have helped in other capacities. She is so committed to helping young women develop to their full potential. That it's impossible to overstate the impact she's had on young students who have come through this university over the years. The good news is we're not going to let her go. We're gonna figure out how to keep her very connected to this university and to Notre Dame athletics. She's too great an asset not to continue to play a role with us. And so while she's retiring from coaching, we'll be excited to keep her as part of the Notre Dame community.
Fantastic. Can you say a little bit about Niele? Yeah,
absolutely. It's been an interesting few weeks and an interesting day for me because there's a certain sadness in having Muffet retire, although I've had a lot of time to prepare for it. And then it's been especially difficult because we can't be with the student athletes on the team right now, right? And frankly, we delayed the announcement in hopes that we'd get to a point where we could reassemble the team. And so both those things, made for a challenging day. The flip side is we all take such pride in having a member of the program ready to step into the role and follow her, right? There's such a joy to having watched Niele go from point guard here to an NBA coach this past year to now coming in and taking over the program. So a lot of mixed emotions, but enormous confidence in Niele. I was fortunate enough to be with Muffet and Niele when we told the team earlier, and Niele got pretty emotional about it, and it just spoke to how much this place means to her.
Yeah, well, we're going to be sad, all of us, to see Muffet go on so many levels, but congratulations on choosing a very worthy successor. I mean, Niele won a national championship as the point guard and then as an assistant coach, so she comes very highly regarded on so many different levels. Let's talk a little bit about the COVID-19 crisis. These past 6 weeks, just when you feel like you've seen everything, this rewrites history on so many different levels. Tell us a little bit, with all the decisions that you've had to make and have been a part of larger governing bodies, whether it's working with the PEC, 5, commissioners, or whether it's working with the NCAA and other bodies. Tell us a little bit about what's been the North Star for you to try to make those decisions, and how crazy has this been this time?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's humbling because I'm wrong so often in this period of time. There's just no precedent.
Right.
There's nothing to lean on. But what we do lean on is that North Star. And we repeat constantly to our coaches and our staff and our student athletes, our primary concern is the health of our students and our staff. And all decisions we make are going to start from that perspective. I'll have people come to me and say, I think another school's getting a competitive advantage because they're doing X or Y. And I say, I don't care. I mean, that's just not our focus right now. Our only focus is what helps the young people. How can we help them stay safe and healthy? And of course, it doesn't take any persuading here to do that, because that's the nature of this institution. And the people who work here, they have that orientation.
Well, probably a question that's on everybody's mind, and we'll get right to it to start here, is when do you think there will be a decision made on the start of the college football season? And what can you tell us at this point about the Ireland game in particular?
Yeah. The important thing to keep in mind about the start of the athletic season, if you will, is that it's entirely dependent on the start of the university academic year. And so the first important marker for us will be the decision by Notre Dame about the second half of summer school and then about the fall semester. We made this point in a conversation with the vice president the other day, and I've made it publicly a lot. That's the difference between college athletics and anything else. They're just talking about when they can safely conduct a sporting event. We're talking about when we return to school. And so that's the first marker for us. Once we have that information, the second issue for us is sufficient time to allow the students to prepare. And there's some small differences, but generally it's in the 6 to 7 week range, that we have to have that much time for our students, once we know school is going to start, to prepare. Only after we have those two pieces of information can we start to address the rest. And while I understand people's eagerness to get an answer, especially with regard to the Ireland trip, we just can't go down that road yet. We need more information. And as we continue to get it, we'll build off it. I should say there was an announcement in Ireland yesterday about large events and a prohibition of those through September. That specifically excluded sporting events, so it's not determinative of whether Notre Dame can play Navy there. Finally, not to belabor this, let me remind everybody it's Navy's home game.
Yeah.
And the decision rests primarily with Navy as to where to play the game if the season starts on time. And we'll be a good partner, and we'll be prepared to go wherever Navy thinks is the best place.
So it sounds to me like it's probably more likely that there's not a decision that will be made imminently. There's other decisions that have to be made beforehand. So it may be several weeks before a decision is made on the start of the college football season.
Yeah, that's right. And that decision about college football will start has to be made before we make an Ireland decision.
Got it.
Keep in mind, this is scheduled to be the first football game of the year.
Right.
I'm excited about that. I think if we can play it on time, what a great celebration of the start of college athletics again, to be the first game up. But we just don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
Well, I'm sure you've played out a number of different scenarios here on how we'll go forward with the football season. Do you see it possible to play games without fans inside the Notre Dame Stadium, or with just a fraction of the crowd?
Yeah, I don't. We're not prepared to play without fans. I don't know how we could be in a position to say we think it's safe for our players to be on the field and to be participating in the game, and not safe for our students to be in the stands. And so we do not envision it. It's not college football. College football is the band and the cheerleaders and the entire environment. I wouldn't rule out the possibility of limiting the size of the crowd in some way, but we haven't really begun to model that yet.
Yeah. So there's complications on the horizon. Recently, the governor of the state of California has come out to say that perhaps even through the end of this calendar year, there should be no music concerts or large sporting events in the state of California. As different governors kind of make decisions, how can you deal with this on a national level when there's going to be different jurisdictions making varying decisions?
That's a great question, Lou. The first thing for people to understand about it is that football is a little different than any other collegiate sport in that the decision-making primarily lies with the commissioners. And I have the good fortune to be in conversation with them a lot through the College Football Playoff Management Committee. But they talk every day. They're gathering that information. And so that's where the decision will lie in the first instance. Secondly, I think there's a general view that for college athletics to start, we need all of college athletics to start. And so while I wouldn't rule out some small exclusions, the general view is we want everybody able to play. And so if we have situations where schools aren't back on their own campuses or where states have ruled it out, those will be important factors.
Yeah. I love that. It sounds to me like one of your guiding principles or North Star principles is not just the health and welfare of our student athletes, but that they're treated consistently with the rest of the student body, that they're not held differently or separated from.
Yeah, I mean, that's as an operating matter, that's what we always ask ourselves. Now, there are times you need to draw distinctions in the interest of the students or athletes or in the interest of the other students. And that's okay, but we want to minimize those. And that's true in this. We always start by asking ourselves, if we're drawing a distinction, why and is it justified? In this case, I could see a possibility where the football team in that needing that 7-week period might gather before the rest of campus gathers. That's a possibility, but we want to minimize those differences whenever we can.
Makes sense. The eligibility restoration of the spring sports student athlete, something that right out of the blocks the NCAA kind of ruled on without a tremendous amount of consultation, perhaps. We had to respond to that. Tell us a little bit about the decision-making process and how Notre Dame is going to handle that.
Well, it's been fascinating. As you suggested, came quickly and without all the consultation we would like. We had a vigorous discussion inside the ACC, Father John and the presidents, about what we might like to do. And again, we argued for that same principle. What we suggested was one way to look at this is that all seniors, all students were impacted by this. They all lost opportunities to do the play that they had rehearsed months for, or to finish their research, or to serve as student body president, or whatever it might be. And we ought to not do too much to draw a distinction. And ultimately, that position didn't prevail. And so there was a view nationally that all spring sports students would get an extra year of eligibility. And the ACC decided not to take a different position. What we've done is honor something we've had for a long time, which is give our coaches the ability to control their rosters. But in these times of extraordinary financial uncertainty, we're not providing any additional aid or increasing any budgets. So if a coach can figure out how to accommodate somebody and provide that extra year within the current constructs of what a grant and aid budget looks like, that's okay. But otherwise, probably not going to be available.
Great, and to that end, we've seen recently the University of Cincinnati announce that they're going to eliminate their men's soccer program. Some other schools have followed with wrestling programs, et cetera, in a way to prepare for the economic impact in downsized sports. We saw some of that happening before the COVID-19 process. One of the things we've tried to do here at Notre Dame is to try to raise as much expendable money as possible through the Rockne Heritage Fund, and as well as to endow the coaching positions and to endow the grants and aid. Tell us a little bit about how you see with the COVID-19 the impact on finances for college athletics, not just here at Notre Dame, but more broadly, and how we're best prepared to respond.
Yeah, it's going to range somewhere between very significant to dire. And again, it's going to result in the first instance by whether or not we play football and whether or not that return to football includes an opportunity to fill stadia again. But we face very significant financial challenges. Thanks to you and your team and the extraordinary generosity of our donors and supporters, we're in a better position than a lot of universities, and that is a great position to be in. Having said that, we face enormous financial challenges, and they will play out over time. I can't rule anything out at this point until, again, we get a better look at how this year plays out for us. This isn't the right environment to consider cutting sports because of your inability to be with the students right now and work through those issues. I think a year from now you'll see a lot of universities, depending upon, again, what the revenue looks like in this year, having to take some very significant measures to reduce expenses.
Here's a question from a current Notre Dame parent, Jim Gradeville, class of '76 from Portland, Oregon.
Great class.
Yeah, it is. It's probably the second best class at Notre Dame. Maybe first, because I have to
when
be
you got the president, you got our boss in '76, Lou. Come on.
I'm going to go, yep, that's the best one for job security reasons. Are all varsity athletes at home, or are some of them on campus? And how are they keeping up with their fitness, strength, and agility goals during this time? What activities are your coaches allowed to do and not to do with their student athletes during this remote period?
Yeah, they are all back home or to a safe place that they traveled to from Notre Dame. As you know, we have some international students, not student athletes, who are still here living in the Morris Inn, but our athletes have returned to largely their homes. You know, it's a challenge because their circumstances are so different. And you can't go to your high school gym, it's closed. You can't go to a workout facility. So it varies a lot. Our strength conditioning coaches, our nutritionists, our trainers have been providing information every day. We've got a lot of video workouts which people can take a look at and maybe they can use, but we've sent resistance bands, for example, to our football team to use. So we've worked very hard on looking at the resources they have available, looking at the reality of their environment, and trying to support them. Again, our first focus of support is, are you healthy?
Right.
How you doing mentally? How you doing physically? And then I'm worried about whether you're going to be prepared to kick a soccer ball or swim or play football for us. But I've been really impressed with the creativity and ingenuity of our staff in helping the student athletes think about how to get ready for another season.
Yeah. I certainly don't want to break any confidentialities, but maybe I do, actually. Can you tell us a little bit about the recent meeting that you and the conference commissioners had with Vice President Pence, and what were some of the main topics of conversation?
Yeah, it was a great conversation initiated by the White House. I was very impressed with Vice President Pence's preparation. The sentiments he expressed, but he was a really good listener. He asked great questions, sought to understand the college athletic dynamic better, began by thanking especially the commissioners for the hard choices they made to stop conference tournaments in the middle of the tournaments to try and keep people safe. I will say, as an aside to you and to our audience, I took special pride in that call that he chose to ask me to thank Father Jenkins for his prayers.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Beautiful. Here's a question from Rockney Athletics member and a parent of an incoming Notre Dame student, Dr. Chris Svorso, I should say, class of '94 from Lakewood Ranch, Florida. He would like to know what new precautions or measures will be taken to help keep our student athletes and our spectators safe if the teams get back to competing in this environment.
Yeah, it's the question we spend a lot of our time on.
Yeah.
And there aren't final answers other than to say we're thinking of everything, we're looking at everything. And it's as mundane as, do you do the walk from the Goog to the stadium when you're playing football again? Or do you not do that anymore?
Yeah.
What do we do in terms of facility issues like our restrooms, additional sanitizing stations, What does that all look like? Does our concession model change? How does it change in light of this? One of the things that's been brought to my attention by a few people is, in some of our sports, it's the equipment that presents the greatest danger for transmitting the virus. And so what's the sanitation system for that? Will we approach strength conditioning differently in terms of how many people are in the weight room, or how the equipment is cleaned between sets? We're spending a ton of time right now, again, not knowing exactly when people will be back or what form it'll take on those issues.
Let's move to some questions that are not as kind of COVID-19 related, but broader questions about athletics at Notre Dame. And let's begin with, how important is football independence to Notre Dame going forward?
Well, I think that is probably an answer that depends on the person, and our members of our community may have different views. For me, it's very important. And it is important not from a football perspective. There's no question that independence creates challenges for us competitively and financially. But what it does is it allows us to promote the university more effectively than I think any other athletic program in the country. And that's always been the purpose. Mm-hmm. The guy I'm so fond of quoting and learning from, Jesse Harper, the first athletic director here, that was his legacy. Mm-hmm. He said, we should use football to promote Notre Dame, and Rockne took that and put it on steroids, if you will. Yeah. But that's the model. And so that's the value of the NBC relationship. It's to promote the university. It's not a football dynamic. The fact that no school in the country has ever played in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York in the same year, and we've done it 9 times, that's why you're independent in football. Yeah. And it's those sorts of opportunities, the Shamrock Series, hopefully the opportunity to go to Ireland, that's all about football independence. And that's why we hold on to it. If we reach the point where the competitive cost to us is too great, we'll have to reconsider. But right now, I'm comfortable with the balance.
Great. A question from Jesse Harper, council member and a member of your Student Athlete Advisory Council, John, class of '76, and Kim Callahan. You know them well from recently moved to Bonita Springs, Florida. The question is this: the state of California passed a bill this past year that will allow for student athletes to sign their own endorsement deals, hire an agent to represent them, etc. And starting in 2023, Florida just passed a bill where this would go into effect next year. Where do you stand on this, and how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I think it's over 25 states, 26, 28 states have now passed some form or have that legislation under consideration. You know, Father John gave an interview in the New York Times now, I think 5 years ago, where he was one of the first in the country to speak to this. We've consistently, again, using that standard, other students here can capture name, image, and likeness. Student athletes ought to be able to do the same. We shouldn't not allow them to, but there have to be parameters around that. And so the focus right now is, what are those parameters going to be? There will be name, image, and likeness rights granted to student athletes. I think it'll happen soon. Mm-hmm. I kind of wish the NCAA had hit the pause button given all that's going on in the world, but I think the legislation will move through. And we'll be interested to see what final form it takes. There are versions of this we very much support. Mm-hmm. For example, right now, a student athlete who comes up with a great business idea unrelated to athletics may not be able to capture the opportunity that another student has. Mm-hmm. The ability to give lessons in your hometown in the summer. Mm-hmm. The ability to be a social media influencer. Right. Those are all things that ought to be able to happen. Commercial endorsements get a little more tricky. I know mm-hmm. that's what people go to mentally in this area, mm-hmm. But we've got to be a little more careful in that area. The issue we face and the issue we have to make sure this doesn't destroy is the need to have some equity in the recruiting process. And if name, image, and likeness moves into recruiting through a lot of sham transactions, then we're going to have a major problem.
Yeah. So one loss Notre Dame football team in 2018 makes it to the college football playoffs. When you think about building future schedules for the football team in particular, What do you think about how do we prepare a competitive enough schedule that isn't, too crazy, that will position us to be able to compete at the highest levels?
Yeah. No one would believe how much time we spend on this issue. For 12 games a year, yeah. It's hard to believe, but it is such a challenge. We want to accommodate our broadcast partner, and we want to have great opportunities for them. We want to build a competitive schedule. We want to be very careful about how it intersects with fall break or our testing schedule or whatever it may be. So there are a ton of factors you bring in. The two competitive things we're focused on is, one, creating markers against other conferences. So we'll always have a Pac-12 marker. We'll always have ACC markers. If you look at our future schedules with Alabama, Texas A&M, Ohio State, we're trying to get markers against the Big Ten and the SEC, and we'll have some Big 12 opportunities down the road. So that's number one. The second is we've got to be able to say at the end of the day, our 12 games are as demanding as anybody else's 13. And we've got to build a schedule that allows us to say that.
So here's a question from Rockne Athletics member and Baden Guild member Tom Gibbons from Allentown, Pennsylvania. Jack, what are your thoughts concerning the ever-growing transfer portal for all sports?
Well, it's been an interesting change in college athletics, the number of students who transfer. And frankly, the success of that experience hasn't been all that we'd probably wanted to in terms of student satisfaction and graduation rates and some other things. Part of it is the process has been a bit of a mess with a waiver process and complication as to who can and who can't transfer. The NCAA is very close in considering a one-time transfer rule, which would basically say an opportunity, of course, any other student has, that you can transfer one time and get away from all of this filing waivers and one student getting immediate eligibility and another not. So I anticipate some form of the one-time transfer right to be adopted in the not too distant future. And I think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah. A few of our teams have had just recently some wonderful turnaround seasons, in particularly the men's golf program. And then we were off to a tremendous start with the baseball program before it was cut short. Can you say a little bit about those programs, the coaches, and how bullish you feel about those going forward?
Yeah, we were having a great spring across the board. I spend the rest of the interview talking about everybody, but without exception, every spring sport had started well, as we anticipated they would. And a lot of credit goes to some of those coaches and the changes we've made. Some have been coaches that have been here a long time. We take for granted that Deanna Gump's making the tournament every year in softball. Right. Remarkable record in that regard. But Link Jarrett injected great new energy and new focus into our baseball program, and you could see that the sweep of North Carolina. Yeah. They were actually on the bus going to batting practice at Louisville when we called and said, you can turn that bus around, and I know how disappointed they all were. Yeah. John Hendrigan's done an amazing job with the men's golf program. I believe we finished the fall season ranked 7th in the country.
That's amazing.
And again, program after program after program. One of the reasons that happens here, as it does in any great department at the university, is the way the coaches lean on each other, learn from each other, cross sport. And one of the jobs of an athletic director is to try and create an environment where your coaches will share with each other. And at this place, they do a great job sharing.
A question from President Circle member and Notre Dame parent Eileen Hickey from Fairhaven, New Jersey. Pretty straightforward question. Will Notre Dame be holding their summer sports camps?
We've already announced we won't hold any overnight camps, consistent with the university not reopening the dorms. We haven't made a final decision on day camps yet. Those are the non-residential ones that tend to be 1 day or 2 days. We'll make that decision soon. We're going to wait for the university's decision on the second half of summer school.
So you've been in the job now for 12 years, Jack. When you look at what it takes to be a successful coach at Notre Dame, what have you learned?
The most important thing is to embrace the distinctiveness of Notre Dame. If you see some of those distinctions as obstacles to overcome, you're not going to be successful here. And for most coaches, that would be the instinct, right? Oh my gosh, whether it's the residentiality requirement or the challenge of admissions or whatever it might be, you've got to see that as the unique value that you have to offer. And the coaches that are here all embrace that notion that we're going to, as Brian likes to say, double down on the distinctions. We're going to do everything we can to embrace them, because if you don't, you have to offer the same thing everybody else has, and we're not like anybody else, and so we ought to embrace those distinctions.
The NFL draft begins tomorrow night. We have 9 members of last year's football team that are going to be considered to be drafted. In many of these professional teams, it's a huge investment. They call around to the coaches and other members of the athletic staff just to ask, to gain more insight into the person behind the athlete. Do you get those calls, and what are they typically asking about?
Yeah, it takes 2 forms typically for me. One is I'm at a lot of practices.
Yeah.
And the scouts from the teams are at practices, and occasionally they'll come up and enter into a conversation with me. The other is the people I have gotten to know in the industry will call me. I can't say I've ever gotten a blind call from a general manager, but those team presidents, in a couple of instances, owners or general managers who I built relationships with over time will definitely pick up the phone and ask me about somebody, ask me for my impressions.
They're usually character questions?
Almost always, in part because they extrapolate from my own athletic ability that I couldn't possibly have any worthwhile information in that regard. But yeah, it's it's the things you observe about a young man, or your experiences with them, your interactions with them. Maybe they've hit a bump in the road, and the questions relate to that bump in the road. Incredibly proud of the 9 young men who are under consideration in the draft this year. Special tip of the hat to Matt Bayless, the head of strength conditioning for football. The performance of our guys at the Combine in the aggregate was as good or better than anybody else in the country, and that speaks a lot to what Matt's done with that program.
In 1991, 1991, Notre Dame entered into a groundbreaking relationship with NBC to televise all of its football games. And while that was a breaking move at the time, many of the conferences now have inked their own deals. They've been very lucrative for conference members. Some might argue that what was a signature strength and differentiator for Notre Dame has turned into something where it's maybe not as profitable here at Notre Dame as it is for some who belong to some of the bigger leagues. Can you tell us what are your thoughts about that? And NBC has been such a great partner for us, but how do we stay competitive financially in the emergence of the ACC network? Any thoughts on that? Yeah.
First of all, we continue to do well relative to our peers in the over-the-air rights. That's the Saturday afternoon football rights, the ESPN games on television, and so we're very pleased with that. The difference has been the performance in the Big Ten network and the SEC network. Thanks to the performance of those 2 networks and some of their unique bowl ties, those 2 conferences have separated themselves from the rest of us by a significant amount. And so the challenge for the Pac-12, the Big 12, and the ACC is to try and figure out how to keep that gap from getting too big so it impacts our ability to compete. The ACC network is an important step in that regard. It has launched successfully. I've been very pleased with the quality of it, and the distribution has been very strong. Having said that, the single most critical thing to Notre Dame's future ability to compete is our ability to endow coaching positions in grants and aids. Something that you've helped pioneer and lead. The market's going to continue to be a challenge. We want to stay true to who we are. We'd like to not have advertising on video boards and assault you with commercial messages when you're at our events. We'd like to make sure our demands on our students aren't more than they need to be. And our ability to compete and to have the resources to compete and stay true to being who Notre Dame is depends on building that endowment. And we've had a lot of success, and I can't thank the people who are watching today and others who have supported us. So many of the questions you brought up were Jesse Harper Council members or Rockne Heritage Fund members. That's everything for the future of Notre Dame athletics. We need those discretionary dollars, but it's the endowing of the coaches. You introduced me as the James E. Rohr Athletic Director of the University of Notre Dame. That sort of endowment is critical to our future.
Fantastic. One final question. When you think about the future of college athletics, and there's so many moving parts right now, perhaps more now than at any point in its history, what concerns you the most and what excites you most about the future?
Well, what excites me is what excites me every day, which is the extraordinary impact we have on young people.
Yeah.
We're celebrating that today with Muffet McGraw, the impact she has had on young women, many of whom are part of the university today in various roles. That's at its core. There's no better form of education than college athletics. I mean, you've heard me say many times, if you ask any teacher what the best environment is, they'll say, give me a small number of students for an extended period of time. That's what happens in athletics. So as long as we can maintain that, as long as we don't become minor professional sports, I think the future is bright, and I couldn't be more excited about it. I think the challenge in the future is whether you can hold together groups of universities on a common athletic platform that start to diverge in terms of models and financial resources and other things. I think there's more pulling college athletics apart at that level than there's ever been. And I hope we can find a way to sort of reground ourselves in the educational mission that Notre Dame views as core to college athletics.
Well, I cannot thank you enough, Jack, for taking this time on a very busy day to be with us and to, as you so always do, articulately argue what is Notre Dame's position in this changing landscape that is college athletics. I want to just let everyone know that we will be joined next week by our Vice President for Student Affairs, Aaron Hoffman-Harding, talking more about the student experience and the future as we adapt to the changes at hand. And then the following week, we'll be joined by Shannon Cullinan, our Executive Vice President. So we hope to see you next Wednesday at 3 p.m., and we'll continue to bring these stories forward. And if we could, Jack, one of the ways we've tried to close these sessions is just in solidarity with everybody in their homes, is just close with an Ave Maria, a prayer to the woman who this university is dedicated to. And so if you'll join me, we'll just say together.
Happy to.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Take care. Goodbye. God bless. Thank you.